Hello students, today's agenda is to check homework. We'll be learning about geometric series and you will be able to do 2.9. Today students will be able to add geometric series. And what are geometric series? Well, to be able to understand geometric series, we have to review what geometric sequences are. And a geometric sequence, we have learned before about geometric sequence and arithmetic sequence. Arithmetic is when you add or subtract. For geometric sequence, it's a sequence that gets from one number to the other by multiplying or dividing. Okay, so in here, basically we're multiplying by 3 times. So 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times 3 is 18. 18 times 3 is 54. And so on. But geometric series is the sum of all the numbers in a geometric sequence. And if you notice in here, these are the same numbers, but in here is just separated by a comma because we can find the other one. In here, for the geometric series, is not how you get to this number, but rather what will be the answer if you add 2 plus 6 plus 18 plus 54. So it's the addition of the geometric sequence. 2 plus 6 is 8. Plus 18 is 26. And 26 plus 54, that equals to 70. But how can I do that without having to do all of that addition, especially if I have a bigger list of numbers? Well, there is a formula, and I do want you to understand this formula. This is the formula. The sum is equals to the initial point times 1 minus the ratio to the nth power, all divided by 1 minus that same ratio. And the ratio refers to this number right here. We're multiplying by 3, by 3, by 3. That will be your common ratio. Okay, in the past we have seen it as pattern or as base, but in here we're going to call it ratio. Okay, let's derive this formula. Where does it come from? And so we're going to use the same list that we were using right now, and you can use it with any list. Okay, for example, if we have 2 plus 6 plus 18 plus 54, well, this is the n will be 1. In here it will be 2, 3, 4. The initial point would be 2. And the ratio, as we said before, and the ratio would be times 3. You can barely see it. Times 3 times 3. Okay, that's the common ratio between each one of the numbers. Sum is equals to 2 plus 6 plus 18 plus 54, but we can represent the second number as 2, which is the initial point, times 3. Plus the 18, we can represent it as 2 times 3 times 3. That's the 18 right there. And then the 54, and if you see 2 times 3 is 6, 6 times 3 is 18. And the next one is 2 times 3 times 3 times 3, right? Because 2 times 3 is 6, 6 times 3 is 18, 18 times 3 is the 54. And so this is exactly the same thing as that. So we can now represent it as 2 plus 2 times 3 to the first power plus, now for this one is 2 times 3 to the second power plus 2 times 3 to the third power. And I'm already seeing that, oh, maybe there is a relationship, okay? The next thing that I'm going to do is to get the ratio. And I'm going to multiply this entire thing by the negative of that ratio. Negative 3 in this case. And I'm going to get a new equation. So negative 3 times s is negative 3s, right? I'm multiplying this negative 3, which is the ratio, but the opposite, times each term. This is one term, this is another term, and another term per se. So negative 3 times s is negative 3s. And in here, what I'm going to do is multiply the sign first. Negative times positive is negative. And I'm going to leave this as two different factors. 2 times 3. Now for the next one, negative times positive is negative. Again, I'm going to put the 2 in here. And now that I multiply the signs and I brought down the 2, now I can see that there are a 3 in here and a 3 in here. It's just 2 to the 3 to the second power. Again, negative times positive is negative. And then I bring the 2, and because they're the same base, it's just 3 squared times 3 is 3 cubed. Again, negative times positive is negative. Bring down the 2. These are the same base. And remember that when we have powers in multiplication, you keep the base, but add the exponents. And there is a 3 and chiquitito right here. So times 3 to the 3 plus 1 is 4. And so now I'm going to get these two and I'm going to add them. Okay? And so s plus negative 3s is s minus 3s equals, in here I bring down the 2, but then I notice that this is positive 2 times 3 to the first power, negative 2 times 3 to the first power. So those can cancel each other because they're exactly the same, but one is positive and one is negative. Same here, positive 2 times 3 squared, negative 2 times 3 squared, they cancel each other. And the same here, exactly the same, but one positive, one negative, so they cancel each other. And I'm left with negative 2 times 3 to the fourth power. So now from here, I put them together, and this is what I ended up with. Now I'm going to get the greatest common factor of each side. So the greatest common factor for the left and the greatest common factor for the right side. And so in here, what is common for both of these is s. I divide s divided by s is 1. Negative 3s divided by s is negative 3 equals the greatest common factor for these two terms. This is one term because it's multiplication, okay? So I notice that 2 goes into both. And again, 2 divided by 2 is 1. This whole term is negative divided by positive is negative. And 2 times 3 to the fourth divided by 2, the 2 cancels and you're just left with 3 to the fourth power. Finally, what I'm going to do is that if I'm multiplying s times this factor, I'm going to divide by this factor, which is 1 minus 3 on both sides. This cancels, and you're left with s is equals to 2 times 1 minus 3 to the fourth power all over 1 minus 3. Now, if you look in here, it says that the sum, which I'm going to write down in a minute, the sum is equals to the initial point. If you look at the list that we have here, the initial point is 2 times 1 minus the ratio to the nth power. 1 minus is part of the formula, and r is the ratio, which is times 3 times 3 times 3. That's the ratio, okay? And the nth power in here is to the fourth is what number or how many numbers do we have in that series, geometric series. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so I want you to have that into consideration. That's where it comes from. Can you try this with any series, geometric series? Yes, and you do not have to come up with this formula because you have it. This is just to understand it, just to understand where does this formula come from. What you're going to be doing now is applying this formula. The S represents the sum of that geometric sequence. The A represents the initial point, meaning the first number on that list. The R represents the ratio, or we have seen it as pattern or base before. And the N is just the number of items that are being added. So in this case, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, there are 4 numbers that are being added. Number of items. Okay, so what is the initial point? Which is A. It will be 3. What is the ratio? What is happening? Oh, you're multiplying times 2. Times 2, because 3 times 2 is 6. 6 times 2 is 12. 12 times 2 is 24, and so on. So times 2. And what is N? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's 6. We have 6 numbers or 6 items. Okay, so now let's find the sum. The sum is equals to the initial point. So the initial point is 3 times 1 minus the ratio, which is 2 to the 6th power, all divided by 1 minus the ratio, which is 2. That looks a lot simpler. Now in here, there are some parts that the calculator can do, but you have to be very careful. For example, in here, if you set up all the parentheses, that's fine. Or you can do one step at a time, so that way you can practice PEMDAS. So bring down the 3. Bring down, because on the top you have to do parentheses first, but within the parentheses you have to do the exponent first. Okay, so 1 minus 2 to the 6th power. 2, the power button is y to the x. Sometimes you have x to the y, and sometimes you have a little symbol like this to represent power. Okay, so y to the x or x to the y, and sometimes some calculators will have that. So 2 to the 6th power will be 64. Or you can do 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, times 2 is 32, times 2 is 64. Then 1 minus 2 is -1. For the next step, you can do distributive property, or you can combine this. So it's 3 times 1 minus 64 is -63 divided by -1. 3 times -63, 63 negative. This just changes. This button sometimes is a little different. Let me show you another calculator. Has it like this. Okay, and sometimes you have to press the plus minus first and then the number, but in some calculators like this 2, you press the number first and then the positive negative to change its sign. So -63 times 3 equals -189 divided by -1. Well, in here just negative divided by negative is positive, and 189 divided by 1 is 189. So that's going to be the addition of this geometric series. Now let's see if it's true. Let's just check. 3 plus 6 plus 12 plus 24 plus 48 plus 96. 189. Which one is more convenient, to apply the formula or to do the addition? For small sequences, like even if I had this, it will be easier to just add them, right? However, once we get to bigger numbers, then that will be a problem. Or when we relate it to interest, then this will be useful. Okay, so what is the initial point in here? The initial point is 1. What about the ratio? What's happening here? We're multiplying times 2 is equals to 8 times 2 is 16. How many numbers do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the power will be 5. And the ratio is 2. Now let's apply the formula. The sum will be equals to the initial point, which is 1, times 1 minus the ratio, which is 2, and to the nth power, which is 5. To the 5th power, and so 1 minus the ratio, which is 2. Very easy, right? The initial point, the ratio, the number of items, and the ratio again. So the sum is equals to 1 times 1 minus 2 to the 5th power. In fact, you can do this entire thing. 1 minus 2 to the 5th power. It's scientific calculator. Because 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, times 2 is 32, but then 1 minus 32 is negative 31. If the calculator is scientific, it can even go as far as to do, you can do this parentheses, or you can do the whole thing if you know how to work with parentheses. I'm going to show you in a minute how to do this directly with the entire thing. Ask your teacher if you have to show every single step, or if you can just insert the whole thing in the calculator. I'll show you with this one, okay? So 1 minus 32 is negative 31. But if you want to show step by step, because again, you have to ask your professor, 2 to the 5th power. So all I'm doing is this, and the shade is showing the base. The power button is right here. Whoops. The base. The power button is right here. And then the power and equal. Okay? If you're doing just this part, the base, power button, the 5, and equal. That's just to do this part. So that's 32. Divided by 1 minus 2 is negative 1. The sum is equal to 1 minus 32. We said that is negative 31 divided by negative 1. Then 1 times negative 31 is just negative 31 divided by negative 1. And negative divided by positive is equals to 31 divided by 1? 31. That's my answer. That's the sum. Now let's find out. 31, let's see. 1 plus 2 plus 4 plus 8 plus 16. So 1 plus 2 plus 4 plus 8 plus 16. 31. Right there. What do you do to input the whole thing in the calculator? Because this is dividing the whole thing by this right here, you will need brackets or parentheses in here and parentheses in here so that you can get the right answer. I'm not sure about this. Let me show you. Let me see. Let me not put the parentheses in here. Okay. So I need to open parentheses. 1 times, open another parenthesis, 1 minus 2 to the 5th power, close parentheses. That just gave me this. By closing the parentheses, it gave me the negative 31 from here. But then I have to close parentheses again so that it can include the multiplication with what? Because the initial point is a 1, it doesn't change. But then you have to divide. See, divide this. Open a parenthesis. And then put 1 minus 2. Close the parentheses, which is the negative 1 from here, right? It's right there. And then equal positive 31. Is it doable? Yes, you can do it, but it's a lot of making sure where the parentheses are and making sure that you do put these parentheses. If you don't put these parentheses, just put 1 minus 2, you will get a completely different answer, okay? Because you're dividing by this entire thing. This whole thing, the answer of all of this, divide by whatever you get in here, okay? Otherwise, they'll divide only by 1 and then subtract 2 from the total, I think. And I bet that you're curious about whether how it's going to show in here. Again, you will have to do a parenthesis here, and make sure that you include this parenthesis as well, and 1 parenthesis in here, okay? You need to include those to get the right answer. So in here is open parenthesis, the initial point. This is times, so make sure you put times. Times, and then don't forget the parentheses. And then 1 minus 2 power 6, close parenthesis once, close parenthesis again, divided by, make sure you open parenthesis again, 1 minus 2, close parenthesis, and equal. See? 189. But you need to do or include the parentheses when you're pressing. Okay, the rest is just the same, because since this is a scientific, only with scientific calculators, you will do first the parentheses, within the parentheses, that, as long as you keep those parentheses in there, you'll do everything for you. You just have to make sure you put the correct order. And here we have one where you have fractions. Fortunately, we have one button with the fractions in here. Unfortunately, I haven't explored this one to see if there's anything that we can do with fractions. I see something in there, but I haven't tried it. And so in here, the initial point is 1. The pattern or ratio, well, when you have 1 and then you have 1/2, that means that you multiply times 1/2, because 1 times 1/2 is 1/2. See, you just put it over 1, and 1 times 1, 1. 1 times 2, 2. Times 1/2, 1 times 1, 1. 2 times 2, 4. Remember that in fractions, you just multiply straight. Okay, just a reminder. 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 2 is 4. The same, if I multiply times 1/2, 1 times 1 is 1, 4 times 2 is 8. 1 times 1 is 1, and 8 times 2 is 16. Okay, so the ratio is 1/2, multiplying by 1/2. And the n is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items in this list again. A equals 1, R equals times 1/2, and you can put a little dot or parentheses, N is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. And so now we're ready to use our formula. The sum is equals to the initial point, which is 1, times 1 minus the ratio, which is 1/2, and I'm going to put it between parentheses because we're raising the whole fraction to a power. And the power comes from the n in here. And down here is going to be 1 minus 1/2. And if you work with other that don't have a fraction button, what it will do is that it's going to give you decimals for the answers, which is okay for some teachers or professors, but you might want to check. Let me show you. In here, 1/2, you open parentheses, 1/2 is the same as 1 divided by 2, close the parentheses, is 0.5, right? 1/2 is 0.5. And then raised to the 5th power, it will give you, and I'll write it in here on the side, is 0.03125. So hold that on the side. If that's what you're going to be working with, you can put it, you know what, let me write it side by side and do both at the same time. Or do one and then do one and then do the other. Okay, so 1 times 1 minus, now I'm going to put that number, 0.03125, all 1 minus 1/2 is just 1/2, right? A whole number minus half of it is half of it. Or let's put 0.5 since we're working with decimals already on this side. Okay, so the sum is equals to 1 minus that, 1 minus 0.03125 equals 0.96875 times 1 is just going to be 1 times anything is just like the same, right? Divided by 0.5. So divided by 0.5 equals, the sum is equals to 1.9375. That's if you're not working with fractions. Now let's check and then we'll do it with the fractions. Okay, so 1, since it's a scientific calculator, all you have to do is 1 plus 1 divided by 2 plus 1 divided by 4 plus 1 divided by 8 plus 1 divided by 16 equals. If you notice, it's exactly the same answer right there. See? And that was just to check. Now let's do it with fractions. Again, with the same information, the sum is equals to the initial point times 1 minus the ratio, which is 1/2, to the 5th power over 1 minus the ratio. And now this will be 1 times 1 minus 1/2 to the 5th power. And in here, it's tricky. It's a lot of buttons, but it's 1 over 2 to the 5th power. And to convert it to fractions, you just press in here. Or you could have said, oh, minus, and then 1 to the 5th power is 1, and then 2 to the 5th power, that's another way to do it. And it's 32, so 1 over 32. All over 1 minus 1/2 is 1/2. And anything multiplied times the 1, you can just get rid of that 1 already. Okay, or you can use distributive property. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times negative 1 over 32 is negative 1 over 32. And I think just for the sake of it, I'll do distributive property first. So 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times negative 1 over 32 is negative 1 over 32. Now, some people need to see the work, but when you're taking 1 minus whatever, you just have whatever is left to get to that number. But 1 is the same thing as 32 over 32. We're just getting this denominator and writing in the numerator and denominator for this 1. 32 divided by 32 is that 1 right there. And don't forget the 1/2 in here. I know it's a lot more tricky with fractions, but it's fun too. And so 32 minus 1 is 31. And we have the common denominator. And don't forget the 1/2 in there. And for the division of fractions, all you do, multiply the outer numbers. 31 times 2 is 62. And 32 times 1 is 32. We simplify by dividing by 2, just because both are divisible by 2. And so 62 divided by 2 is 31. 32 divided by 2 is 16. And that'll be the answer as an improper fraction. Or you might want to divide, and it goes 1 times 16, 16 to 31, you have 15 sixteenths. Or you can just check to see that when you divide 31 by 16, it's equals to 1.9375, which is what we got in here as decimal. So it all depends on how they ask for, if it's a decimal or a fraction. This is improper. This is mixed fraction, meaning that it has whole numbers and fractions. This is improper because the numerator is bigger and it shouldn't be bigger. But sometimes they're allowed those answers. A lot of rules about the fractions, right? Okay, with this, we finish 2.9. With this, we finished 2.9. If you can please give us a thumbs up, subscribe around here. Here is the list of the entire playlist. Here is the next video. Now you're able to do 2.9 and have fun. And if you need more review on fractions, let me know. I can tag in the description below. I can tag some fraction videos.